Okay. Hello, Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with another episode of Ask Dave. Today's question is an interesting one that comes to us from David Dawson, who's N8DKW. And he says, I would like to use end connectors over and above the 259s on my 13B2 antenna and maybe a 2 kilowatt amplifier. Remember, our power limit is 1.5 kilowatts PEP. And if you're doing FM, it's just 2.5 kilowatts. If you're doing FM, or if you're doing weak signal work, again, it's 1500 watts PEP. Which would you recommend, the end connector or the 259? Coaxial cables will be approximately 75 feet. Okay, let's look over here. I'm going to look at this 13B2 Cushcraft. You can get to this by just putting in 13B2 into Google, or 13B2 antenna, and it will take you to this. This antenna is a 13 element, 2 meter antenna. Okay, this is gross overkill for normal FM line of sight transmissions. Because remember, the way that you work with, I'm just going to draw the earth here. Okay, and you've got an antenna here, and it's got a certain horizon, and then it just goes on up into outer space. The ionosphere curves at a titch. The radio horizon is 4/3 the visual horizon. Our sight lines are literally line of sight. Think of the phrase line of sight. That's as far as we can see. Now, if you can see that distance and you know what that distance is, the radio horizon is a bit much more than that, 4/3 of that. Now, that'll only do you good on flat ground, because if you're in a mountain and a mountain gets in your way, too bad. I have that problem with our club repeater. My line of sight to the club repeater is interrupted by a hill that's remarkably close to me. So I have a terrible time with the club repeater because I don't have an actual line of sight. The club repeater can hear me pretty well, but I get multipath coming back, and it just garbles the club repeater immensely. Okay, so the question is, what are you using this for? And I'm assuming that, let me describe some things here. The antenna shows in the advertisement as horizontally polarized, which means if you do horizontally polarize it, you're not doing FM. Now, like I said, it's gross overkill unless you've got a very, very specific something you're trying to get into that would need that much gain. With 13 elements, the beam width, it's 15 dB gain, front to back ratio 26 dB, side lobe attenuation 60 dB, let's see, max power 1500 watts, okay. So here's the antenna, and it's horizontally polarized, and it's got all these elements out here. We do what we call weak signal work. Now, this is a misnomer, okay? Because weak signal work is anything other than FM. So this could be single sideband, CW, FT8, and when you start getting into these, you get into strange modes of propagation. You get into sporadic E. You can also do off of these meteor bounds. The Earth is constantly bombarded by very tiny meteors. And each one of these meteors, about the size of a grain of sand, will burn up in the atmosphere. As they burn up, they turn to gas. That gas is left behind, and because of the speed with which it goes through, that's ionized gas. Ionized gas is a great reflector. So meteor scatter communications, or meteor bounce, is there's some FT8-ish modes that you can use for that. Look at your install for FT8, which is WSJT-X, and look at the different modes. One of those modes is made specifically for meteor bounce. The problem is that little ionized trail stays ionized for only a fraction of a second. If it's a bigger meteor, it can be longer, but most of them are definitely a fraction of a minute. And in that time, with this mode, it keeps pinging, constantly pinging. And if it picks up a ping back, it'll complete the QSO, just poof, before you can say it, and then you're done. You've got one in the logbook. There are other things you can do here. Moon bounce. This requires a special setup. You will have to actually get multiple of these antennas and put them together in something that has a computer-driven azimuth and as elevation to follow the moon. The moon is actually a lousy reflector. It's so big, it's got all kinds of things that will do multipath emissions coming back. But Joe Taylor and crew have a special mode for moon bounce. Okay. Now there's other things you can do with long distance on sporadic E. Let me see if I can find some in the latest QST. Okay, we're going to look in here for a column labeled The World Above 50 Megahertz. It's on page 82. Okay. Effective portable, da-da-da-da-da. Here's an example of several of those types of antennas put together. Now, this is what I wanted to show you here, this one. Let me get it there where the light doesn't hit it so hard. Okay. On November 25th, NE5U operated from grid EL19 and made contacts using the sporadic E opening from Midwest to Texas. Now, it doesn't say whether that's 2 meters or 6 meters or 220, but you can get communication like that, okay, with 2 meters. It's something very interesting to play with. By the way, you only need to be a tech to do that. You don't need your fancy amateur extra or anything like that. You can play with these and do these kinds of modes like this. Another mode that you might do here is amateur television. The problem is with amateur television, it has a very wide bandwidth. Okay? So to get enough power per hertz to close the link on ATV, you need significant power. Okay? So anyway, there's lots of things that you can do. This has turned into sort of a little lesson on things you can do with 2 meters other than FM, okay, that you would need this antenna for. So now let's come back to his original question. I would like to use end connectors. There's nobody stopping you from using end connectors over and above the 259s on my 12B2 antenna. At that frequency, you might gain a dB or two. But if you're dealing with weak signal work, a dB or two could be extremely important. Okay? So, and if you're going to go a 2 kilowatt amplifier, it sounds like you are looking at moon bounce or meteor bounce or doing some of the sporadic E or something like that, would I recommend the end connectors? Now, I just said in a video, a couple of videos ago, that end connectors don't make enough of a difference to bother with taking your PL259s off and putting end connectors on. You say you have 75 feet of coax. This coax should be LMR 400 or better, okay, and which is made for microwave work. It works extremely well on 2 meters. And yeah, go ahead with the end connectors because you're trying to get every tiny last ounce of performance out of this system. End connectors are weird. They're a little harder to find in the US, although they're readily available. You can go to DX Engineering or Ham Radio Outlet and get them, as well as a number of other smaller suppliers. I'd start with DX Engineering. And you want to get some kind that's relatively easy to put on. Now, I will note, if you're using LMR 400, LMR 400 makes its own crimpable end connectors, but you need a special tool, and you need to use their connectors. And, you know, if you've got the money for 2 kilowatts on 2 meters, go for it. Do it. Put those end connectors on there. Now, your radio, if you got it in the U.S., has probably got, you know, it's like an FT991 or B or something like that. They have PL259s on them. You may want to go ahead and replace that with an end connector, but if it's just the one connector, like I said, you're not going to lose very much there. Switches and things like that are all available in end connectors. You can get lightning suppressors. No, I didn't say eliminators. If you hit direct strike, all bets are off. But you can get the lightning arresters with end connectors on them too. There's a whole universe out there that uses end connectors. Go for it. I personally don't do weak signal work. I don't have the equipment to do it. I've got antennas that could do it. I have a 10-element beam on 70 centimeters, which I use to reach Grand Junction because it's not quite line of sight. You got to kind of go around the side of a hill a little bit, and it works really well for me, and I don't have multipath issues with it. I do have multipath issues with 2 meters. So there you go. Would the end connectors be worth it? All I can say is if you're going to go to that much trouble, why not throw in the end connectors? Would it still work with PL259? Absolutely. You may find that the antenna itself has an SO239, which is the mate to the PL259. So you may have to get a female end connector to put on that, or you might be able to order it that way. Okay, your amplifier, if you buy it in the U.S., it's very likely going to come with the SO239s. It's just they're a lot easier to use. But you can get amplifiers with end connectors too. So if you're going to go end connector, go all out and do your entire station as end connectors, or just stay with the PL259s. The biggest attenuator in your system is that 75 feet of coax. So don't scrimp on coax. I hope that's not 75 feet of RG8X, because you're going to lose more than half your signal right there. In fact, if you put that on a 1.5 kilowatt amplifier, you run the risk of creating issues with it, burning it out. So, and I don't recommend RG213. I recommend going with the LMR 400. If you've got lots of money, there's an LMR 500 and an LMR 600. And those are even lower loss cables. Times Microwave, which is the maker of the LMR 400 series, as you know, has got microwave in its name, and for a reason. because if you go look at the cables that are being put in on cell towers and all kinds of things like that that actually do deal with extremely weak signals, LMR, 400, 500, 600, and so on, to make a very high gain or very low loss cables. So there you have it. If any of you would like to help support this channel, go to dkassler.com/support, and you can go either the Patreon route or the PayPal route. Please subscribe, please click like, please do a comment. YouTube looks for engagement on my channel, so leave a comment, a nice comment. I know we're talking about PL259s versus end connectors, and there are purists out there who consider the PL259 an abomination and end connectors forever. They may have their own flags, I don't know. But fine, leave it to the purists to do that. But if you are going to be doing truly weak signal work, every little bit counts. Find a way to shorten that coax. Good luck to you, and 73.